Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Private Investigator Advice Podcast. I feel like I sound like that guy from Scooby-Doo right now. My voice is kind of wonky. I caught a little bit of a cold a few days ago, and I'm like on the back end of it, but my voice is not working with me today. But this is going to be episode 95. And I promised a couple weeks ago, or a couple episodes ago, depending on when you're listening to this, that I would talk about what else should be considered when evaluating a surveillance investigator, when it comes to like their performance. And so that's what we're going to talk about in episode 95 here. It's going to be evaluating a private investigator and what should be considered. That's the working title that I have right now before I post this. Because there are other things other than what we discussed last time, which was video percentage. So, but before we get into that, and I'm going to try to get this all into one episode. If I can't, I'll split it up and we'll just finish it on the next one. But this episode is brought to you by PI Advice. PI Advice is selling many templates, one of which is a surveillance template. It's actually got a template that's got all the different sections that you're going to need to have completed to kind of lay out what had happened during the surveillance. I also included an example report in case you're not familiar with what should be in there. And so not only going to get the example, but in the example, you're going to see how I write reports. And the verbiage that's used. And it's going to be good for anyone who's maybe starting their own business. They want to get into the surveillance industry part of it, or maybe you want to get into the industry and you want to get hired on with somebody. It wouldn't hurt to have a template to look at to kind of have an idea of what your reports are going to want to look like. And trust me, they're going to want to look like mine because mine are awesome. But anyways, and there's a little video walkthrough. There's also a retainer agreement there for new businesses. If or maybe you have a retainer agreement, you just want to see if yours is up to date, or maybe should be some more stuff in there to protect you, or lay out the kind of like the groundwork for you and your client, what the expectations are. There's a client intake sheet to make sure you get all the proper information from your client. And the newest one is the workers' compensation guide. It's going to give you all the questions you need for a workers' compensation interview with someone on workers' comp. And it's got the example report and a little video walkthrough. So anyways, definitely check that out. There's also a bundle in there to help you save a little bit of money. That's got the retainer agreement, the surveillance template, and the intake sheet. So definitely check that out. You can see the links below in this video for all those things, or you can go to piadvice.net and check that out. And also, guys, if you are new to this podcast, I thank you for joining me. But also make sure you check out the earlier podcasts. If you're new to the industry or want to get into the industry, like episodes 1 through 10, really good start for you to see if I can talk you out of this industry. Okay, so let's get into the podcast here. So, evaluating a private investigator, what should be considered. Okay, so anyone in any occupation is likely evaluated or measured to some degree, and especially in the investigation industry. And even though we should be measured in this industry, especially surveillance, it can be a very touchy subject for people. I noticed that when I originally wrote my article on video percentage, there were a lot of people that were very concerned about it, and they said different things, and it was a very touchy subject for many people. But I've been evaluated in the industry since I got into the industry, so I'm very familiar with it. I know everybody's hang-ups on it and all the considerations and all that kind of stuff. But it's something that should happen no matter what. Being evaluated. And I'm not just talking about video percentage. I'm talking about there's other things and other considerations. Why I made this podcast, so we can kind of talk about those. Anyways, but one of the great things about being evaluated, at least for me early on in my career, is one of the things I noticed is that I could see where some people excelled more than me. Some people were better at things than me. Sometimes that was in video percentage. Sometimes that was in billable time. It was some of it was in the intangibles that we'll talk about, and it was fine. I needed to know that, so I knew where I needed to get better. And so I took it as an opportunity to stretch my skills a little bit, stretch my abilities, get out of my comfort zones. Because for me, I saw that, and I'm like, okay, yeah. Obviously, I could do better at this. So that gave me an opportunity to learn from these other people in a variety of ways to be better at what I did. Anyways, when I originally wrote that article about video percentage. This is way back when. This is one form of measurement. Just to kind of touch on this real quick. One of the people's complaints was they didn't think it was a fair form of measurement because there's some things that were beyond the investigator's control, which is true. But there's some things that are beyond investigator's control for every investigator. So, with that being said, we're all kind of on the same plane here. We're all on the same playing field. There's everything's out of our control. All we can do is, go up there, show up, and follow them when they leave. And there's always going to be things in our way that we can't control. Anyways, with that being said, it's going to be on the list, and we'll get into that in a second. But also, with performance, you got to understand that when we're evaluating on different things, these are also selling points. So if it's for your own business, it's a selling point. These different things that we're going to consider. If it's for the company you work for, it's their selling point. It could be video percentage. I mean, what company would you rather have do your investigative work? The one that says, hey, my investigator in that area averages, 68% video percentage. Or the company that says, hey, my guy over here in the same area we have an investigator that averages 40% video percentage. Who are you going to go with, right? It makes a difference. You're likely going to go with the guy doing with 70 because he's probably doing something different or better than the guy doing 40%. So it's important. These things are important. It's going to have to happen. Anyways, as we get into this other stuff, there are intangibles that aren't as easy to track, and that's kind of what we're going to be getting into here. So it's going to be, like we just talked about, we're going to be video percentage. For me, I believe this is the first one that we should always evaluate, which we talked about. I believe, and I can't remember what I said on the other podcast, but if you're doing 65%, you're probably in good shape. You're probably doing a good job out there. You're probably putting yourself in the best position to get video, and that's important. And I also, again, all this stuff should be evaluated. I always try to say like over a period of a year to give things to average out. Sometimes there's going to be good months and bad months, and that's going to go with all these things that I'm going to talk about here. Video percentage is one of the first things that need to be evaluated. And if you haven't heard that podcast yet, I think it's a couple back. Check that out. The other things that aren't as easy to track are these intangibles that I want to talk about. So the next one that should be evaluated, and this is something that I didn't really pay attention to as much early in my career because we had a different format. I'll get to it in a second. But the next thing that should be evaluated is the preliminary investigations. So the pre-investigation conducted by a surveillance investigator. So when I was early on in my industry, our managers did the prelim work. And I thought that was a good thing back then because they were really good at it. They could look at information, they could evaluate it and make some decisions, regarding what we're going to do with the surveillance based on those. But what I found was that I didn't know how to interpret the information because they were doing it for me. So I didn't have a chance to see all this information and kind of in my brain kind of like puzzle it together and figure it out because they were already doing it. So, as time progressed, I became a manager and I ended up doing those preliminary investigations. And I learned so much more by doing them about the information that I was getting. And then of course I just, as time progressed, I ended up doing all mine. I would never, even if a company that I did work for did them, I did my own still because I knew my area, my state better than they did. And so I'm going to know different areas to check and things like that for information than they were. So with that being said, if you're not already doing this, every investigation, surveillance, we're just stick with surveillance here, should begin with a preliminary investigation. And in that, it's going to help you find out people that are known to be associated with the person you're, going to be doing the surveillance on. When you do things like, database things like IRB or tracers or DelPoint or whatever ones you're using, there's always going to be some known associates in there that they list, and this could be family members or somehow they're associated through credit, or I'm not quite sure. I actually should probably do some more research about that, but it's going to give you a list of names. Maybe they lived with them, or something like that. But anyways, it'll give you some names to kind of work with. Now, I don't always use those. Those for me can be a lot of times the last resort if I'm having a hard time finding somebody. If I want to go down that web of information. But that's just one of the things you can find out through there. And then you can also find out through known associates through, the social media and things like that. That might help you find a picture of them or might help you find them. So, anyways, that's always important. The preliminary investigation can help you confirm if the address that your client has given you is even correct. Sometimes the information is outdated, it's old, it could even be wrong. Depending on what kind of person you're following, maybe they gave them the wrong address, or and then you're going to find that information through IRB, and if you've done this long enough, you kind of know what to look for. Even it's going to tell you most recently reported addresses and things like that. Through the preliminary investigation, you're going to find, hopefully, if you have access to this information, registered vehicles. And that's a great way to help identify who the person is, what they look like, confirm if you have the right address. That this stuff kind of interconnects together. You can find different addresses to look for, maybe not necessarily the prime one, but you might find a list of addresses to check. You can confirm, the phone number that you've been provided, or find phone numbers for the subject. You can find whether they're registered to them. You can find out if their cell phone belongs to them. Do they own it? Or you can find out if it's a landline. These things are all important in the decisions you make during the investigation, or if you have to make phone calls to them, it might change the way you might pre-text and things like that. You might find through public records, they might have legal problems. Maybe they've been in jail. Maybe they went through a divorce. This might be information that'd be helpful to you when you're doing your surveillance. And of course, one of the lovely things about doing the prelims, you could sometimes find photos. Back in the day, there was no Facebook, but we had the internet, and we would hopefully pray that we could find some kind of article with a photo of our subject if we didn't have one. So now it's a lot easier to find photos than it used to be. But that's what we always prayed for. I'm like, oh, please, let me find an article. Let me find something. They've been in the newspaper or something. Anyways, we should not be, as investigators, solely relying on the information provided by the client. We need to do our due diligence before we even get out there. And listen, this is just scraping the surface of a prelim. I know people who do prelims and it takes them an hour to get it done because they're digging so deep and they want so much more information. And so some people don't. Some people are like, okay, I confirmed that they live here and that's what they look like. I'm good. Let me go. So that's an intangible, because I think a lot of people, sometimes they get lazy. Even people that are, like I told you before, like even if I do subcontract work for another company and they might provide a prelim, I still do my own because I'm likely to find better information or even more information than them, because they don't do the prelims for my state every day like I do, right? They're not going to be familiar with all the places to look. So it's an intangible, and that intangible will reflect how well you do in the field. Real quick, here's a perfect example why a prelim's important. I remember I was working for a company. I was employed, and the client, says, "Here's the person's address, and here's the photo. Here's a photo of him. Like, here's a photo. This is from his work." And when I got out there, a person came out, but it wasn't them. It was a different guy. And what I found out through the investigation was that they had provided the wrong information. It wasn't his picture. Luckily I figured it out and everything worked out okay. I think I'd found a different picture or something like that online. I can't remember. Maybe it was his Facebook page or something. But I mean, you just can't always depend on your information. That's why you're an investigator. You need to investigate. So, okay. Intangibles, right? So another intangible is locating an individual. So you can't, begin a surveillance or you can't begin an investigation, when you got to try to find somebody, if you can't find them. So it is an intangible. And there are some people that are much better at it than other people. Some people might be out of laziness, might because, one person's fearful of doing something and one person's not. And I'm not saying do anything illegal. But some people are just better at finding information, and they dig and they dig and they go in this web of information. They connect the dots, and boom, they find the person. And they put a lot of time into it, and it's a skill. It's a skill, and it's intangible. And listen, I mean, if you can't find the person, the surveillance doesn't begin. And even if it does, you're wasting time because you don't know. You're like guessing, like, oh, let's try this. Let's try this. And sometimes on the back end, before you start, if you do a great prelim, and you've done so much of the work ahead of time before you go out there, you have different options to help you find that person. So locating people is definitely an intangible. I mean, companies or clients don't want to waste money on you just kind of doing guesswork. Sometimes it's necessary, but if you could find them ahead of time and do something really cool and find them, they're going to love you for that, especially if you articulate that in your report. Okay, the next one, another intangible, pretexting. Pretexting is an art form. Absolutely. It's one of those intangibles that I don't think is ever really tracked, but it should be to some degree. Like, if you have like a client for one time, they're probably not going to even grasp how awesome your pretext was to get the information that you did, or that the information you got led to something super awesome. But if you're working for somebody, if you're subcontracting for somebody, or you're employed with somebody, and when you do a pretext and you find them or you confirm them home somehow, that they've been really hard to confirm if they're even home, or maybe the pretext that you do reveals that they have certain vehicles that you didn't know that they had, and that changes the whole course of the case. And now you're rocking it on the surveillance. Pretexting is important. So that's definitely an intangible I don't think is tracked. And it's definitely necessary. I still remember, and it probably wasn't always the best decisions that I would make, but I mean, I was always trying to stretch myself, like I told you earlier, like trying to figure out what worked for me, was this a good pretext or not? And I remember one of them was like a survey. And I was very bold back then, and I would go to the door and I'd be like, let's say the person was Mrs. Smith. And I'm like, hi. And I go, may I please speak to Mrs. Smith? And she's like, well, I'm Mrs. Smith. And I'd be like, hi, I'm doing a survey in the area. I can't remember if I even asked for a name. Now I'm kind of questioning myself. But anyways, I would do a survey and I'd be like, it's for a fictitious name company. And I'd be like, so how long do you watch TV each day? It was just, I wish I could find that survey. How much time do you do this? How much time do you do that? So when I wrote my report, I had this random information in there. It wasn't really random. Some of it was useful. Like, if someone watches 12 hours of TV a day, they're probably not very active outside. I think it was questions like that. But anyways, and then I'd write my report and my boss would be like, dude, how do you get this information? I'm like, bro, you gave us the surveys. I just used them. And he'd be like, well, nobody else is doing that, So anyways, right now I think times have changed over the past 15 years, and I don't pretext like I used to, and not to that degree. Again, I did learn different things about that, and I'm a little more cautious nowadays. You probably heard some of my reasons why in the last podcast about the surveillance that changed my world. I try to use pretexting as a last resort now. I don't use it as aggressively as I used to. But yeah, anyways, we'll keep moving on. Another intangible that can be tracked and is a lot of times by companies who know what they're doing is your billable time. Now, billable means like a company sends you out there, it's an 8-hour surveillance or whatever it is. and you bill it out, and or you exceed that time. Maybe you're out there for 10 hours because the person's active and you haven't lost them. So being billable is critical to, well, doing a good job. Usually, if you're being billable, it means you've done several things. You've not lost them. You've confirmed them home, or you've done something good. Usually, if you're billable. So, for not only this financial success of your company, right? You don't want to have to only work 4-hour days to complete an assignment. If you've been given like a 24-hour budget, you don't want to take 6 days to complete the budget. You want to complete it in 3 days. So you have time for other cases, and you can make more money. And so, anyways, it's critical to, as a company, your financial success. It's critical to the company that you're working for. And they're going to love an investigator that can go out there and maybe on a case you have a 24-hour budget, right? Usually that's 3 days, 3 8-hour days. And what if the investigator goes out there and he finishes it, he or she finishes it in 2 days? Maybe they work 2 12-hour days. They just followed them, they never lost them, and they got all this great video, and now they're open for another day because they've completed the budget a day early. So these are intangibles. This is tangible that is important. It really is. Okay, so the last one I'm going to talk about, this is going to be the last one for listing all the things that you should be evaluated on and what's important, the intangibles. But this is going to be the last one for the end of this podcast for today. So the last one's going to be an important intangible, a tangible one that should be tracked, rather, is the amount of video obtained by a surveillance investigator. In the old days, this was tracked. I still know companies that track this today. Excuse me. I think a lot of times investigators will say, well, this is something we can't control, but I disagree. I think it is very much something you can control in different times. So the main thing a private investigator should be doing is getting as much video as they can without compromising the surveillance. Of course, you're going to have to make certain decisions, during a surveillance day. Sometimes to get the video, you might actually have to compromise the surveillance. There was one time where I knew someone was doing some work in their yard, and I literally, to get the video, I had to park right across the street, and I was getting my video, and it was really good video. But there was a point where the person I was videotaping just stopped what they were doing, turned around, and just stared at my car for an uncomfortable amount of time. And so I continued to videotape. He couldn't see me inside my car. And then as soon as he, went inside, I left. Or at least he moved out of the way or something. He did something to where I was like, okay, I got to get out of here now. Like, this is a point where I think he knows or he's suspicious of my vehicle. And so, but I had already gotten the video that was important. And so I put myself in an uncomfortable position to get video that I might not otherwise have gotten, because, I was out of position. So I put myself in position to do that. And so, this is going to be different for every type of surveillance, but it is definitely something that should be tracked and monitored, because when you have opportunities to get a great amount of video, you need to take them. And this even goes for even spy cam footage. You guys in the insurance investigation industry, when someone goes into a store, you should be going in there to get that video, and that's just all extra video that adds up on top of each other. It should be like a subcategory in this, like how much spy cam footage do you get? People go to places all the time. How often are you going in there? How much video are you getting in there? These are things that I look at when I kind of size up other investigators in my field, even my own friends in the industry. And also look at it from this way. And this is why these things are important. Again, you look at an investigator who's maybe working in the same area as you, or maybe a company looks at two different investigators in the same area, and one investigator, averages 2 minutes a day for over an entire year, while the other investigator averages like 15 or 20 minutes a day. Who is probably doing the better job? maybe the guy who's getting a guy or gal that's getting the 20 minutes a day, maybe, they average like 2 minutes of spy cam footage a day, over a year. Like that's what it averages out to be. And the other person maybe gets like 20 seconds. Somebody's not doing something right. And it isn't the person that's getting the more video. Right. And again, you're looking at the big picture of an investigator, but these are things that need to be evaluated. It could show that, improvements need to be made. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for this podcast. That's going to be part one of this topic. We'll get into part two on the next podcast. And yeah, so before I let you go, I've got two things to discuss, and I thank you guys for hanging around. The first thing is that this podcast episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible's giving away a free book. What better way to utilize your time while you're driving to your assignments than to listen to a book? It could be educational, which I always push for, educational, self-improvement, things like that. Or it could just be for fun, like you're listening to a book that you've been meaning to read. Maybe it's, I don't know, whatever you're into. I don't even read that many fiction books, so I don't really know. The Alchemist was the fiction book that I guess I read, but it was also kind of like a personal development category as well somehow. Definitely check that out. Anyways, they're giving away a free book, guys. And all you got to do is sign up for a 30-day free trial. You get the free book. You cancel before 30 days if you don't want to continue with it before the 30 days is up, and you still get to keep the book. So I really feel like it's a really good deal to kind of get your feet wet into the system to see if it's something that you might like and that you might utilize. And I am an affiliate for Audible. So if you go to www.audibletrial.com/PIA, they will let you know that I sent you there, and I will get a small commission for you putting in, Audible, www.audibletrial/PIA. So anyways, I thank you guys for checking that out. And finally, just something I posted the other day here, and that was just a blurb about my little journey to weight loss and how it's kind of played a role into me being as a private investigator. And it also discusses if you're interested in kind of looking at maybe getting healthier with weight loss, getting off weight related medications or things like that. I give you an email there to go ahead and contact me if you're interested in learning about the system that I've been on as I do this podcast. I think I'm at 65 pounds, possibly. My official weigh-in's tomorrow, so we'll find out. Since January 17th, 2018, and as I'm recording this, it's May 8th, 2018. Now, results vary for everybody. It's not going to be typical for everybody. That someone might not lose the same amount of weight as me in the same amount of time. They might lose more and they might lose less. But anyways, definitely take a look at that. It's going to be on one of the pages of the top banner. It's going to say PI Health. Definitely click on that. And if that's something you're interested in hearing more about, then we'll definitely connect and we'll talk. Alrighty. That's it, guys. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you guys on the next podcast. Bye.